Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Tech Tuesday. I've got Stephen Popovich with me, and we are going to have an amazing conversation. But first, this. Hey guys, Steve Moran here. So first off, Stephen, I realize I should have asked you this before we go on the air. Do you go by Steve or Stephen?
Steve. My mom calls me Steven a lot.
Okay, well, I'm in this big family full of Steves, and it's one of the ways we differentiate. So, I've got an adopted son whose name we call Steven. Everybody else calls him Steve, and then I've got a son-in-law who's Steve, and a grandson now whose middle name is Steve, and so we got lots of Steve here. So I want to make sure I get it right. So, I want to start by setting the stage here. One of the things I love about conferences is the sort of serendipitous meetings that you have with new people. And I met you at CES. I was meeting with somebody else who was somebody who was a reader and a follower who I'd never met in person. And we were having a chat when you and John Reinhardt came by. And I don't know that it was a really good deal for you since it cost you dinner for all four of us. And I do appreciate that. But it was great. It was a great conversation. And one of the things that really stood out to me, and we're going to get into your technology, is that you had what was, at least to me, a really compelling story about being a caregiver in your own family. And so I'd actually like to have you start with that.
Yeah. So kind of how do we get here, kind of thing. Yeah, my background is I'm a high tech entrepreneur. So I've been involved with 4 startup companies, all successful exits. My last company, I grew a healthcare group. I was VP of Global Healthcare for a publicly traded company. And anyway, so we got involved with a lot of things that were clinical, and of course that kind of led to interfacing with other skilled nursing facilities and other kinds of rehab facilities and whatnot. And again, my background is the entrepreneurship type thing. And there are a lot of other technologies that were kind of emerging during that point, and my company was involved with some of those things. And then at the same time, about 2005 or so, my wife and I became caregivers for my in-laws who were in their 80s. And my father-in-law had Alzheimer's, and my mother-in-law had a lot of complications with pain management, back, different issues with back pain, for example. And anyway, so we helped them get into assisted living facilities nearby where we lived, in Austin, Texas area. And anyway, so we kind of started experiencing the challenges in that space in caregiving, professional and a family level, firsthand. So again, I was kind of at the end of my career with the last publicly traded company. I thought, what new thing would I like to get involved with? So we started experimenting with technology in the assisted living facility where my in-laws were, and we were able to actually, it was able to help us be better caregivers and also be able to leverage the resources in that facility, the professional facility, much more effectively. So I'll take a pause.
So how was your senior living, assisted living experience? Was it good, bad, neutral? What was that like?
Well, there's good and bad. The challenge is kind of being there without being there, right? And then there were a lot of weird little things, everything from, that mom and dad want to watch Fox News, and all of a sudden it's speaking Spanish. What do we do? It's just dumb things, right? Now, we purposely put them in a facility nearby where we live so we could bop over, several times a week and all. But so some of those things were, because they were independent living at that point, were just little nuisances, and we got along really well, and also it wasn't a big burden to pop over and fix the TV, for example. But little little things like that, were challenging, of knowing kind of my father-in-law, how he was declining, because in addition to having the Alzheimer's, he also had an issue with a knee, and he had PTSD. So, understanding, kind of what was going on after we left we found was really critically important, not only for us, but also for the staff that was, the people that were there on site on staff. Because they could better assist both my mother-in-law and my father-in-law.
Great. So I want to dig into a little bit about what I do. Go by Clairworks or Clairvoyant Networks. What's the best way to
Well, when I started the company, I thought it was clever. I thought it was a clever name, Clairvoyant, because we wanted to be able to kind of figure out things from data inputs, So my techie had really cool name, still like it. Customers don't like it, by the way. TheoraCare, we did a legal DBA, for TheoraCare, and that's where we sell our products under. That works a lot better because, Theora, my in Greek means she watches over, kind of a thing. And that's kind of what what we're trying to do, is understand kind of what's happening, being there without being there.
Right. So if you were going to explain what TheoraCare does to my grandmother, if she were still alive, how would you describe what you do?
Well, the short elevator thing is understanding kind of, being there without being there. So, for example, are there changes, for example, in grandma's habits? What time is she getting up in the morning? What time does she go to bed at night? How is she traversing her life, inside maybe that assisted living facility or an independent home? Are there any other kind of things that are going on that need to be, asked about or looked into? With everybody, like my grandmother, who, the women on my side of my family, they outlive the men by a long margin. So my grandmother was in her late 90s, and she ended up getting, unfortunately, she had to go into assisted living toward the end of her life. But it was a big change in her life because her activities completely changed, and that changed her spirit too. I was in Texas, she was in California, but in those days, it was more, talking to grandma every night to make sure everything was okay. And my brother was nearby, so between the two of us, there was just the two of us left in the family. We were able to kind of understand where there were declines and then take action to maybe give physical therapy a try. Like with my father-in-law, that was actually kind of a good combination, because it helped him, be able to move around longer. It probably extended his life by a couple of years, but it also was kind of an entertainment thing. It was something for him to do.
Yeah.
Because, the therapist would come in 2 or 3 times a week. This is all private pay, unfortunately, or fortunately, but it was kind of those two things there. But he was a Navy pilot when in his younger days, and he was going to beat this old age thing. So, being able to say, okay, here's the tools, Papa, and let's do it together. So
I love that a lot. So let's talk a little bit about your TheoraCare, and kind of how the technology, how the system works.
Yeah, so there's several pieces of the product. It's a product family. So we started out with a cellular wearable product. So I've got one on here, for example. So it just looks like your average, high-tech watch. And what we did was we built in abilities to be able to have caregivers not only understand, for example, if somebody left a safe zone, we do what we call geofencing. And these products are used in the individual homes and also in assisted living type facilities. But to be able to understand alarms, for example, when my father-in-law might drift off outside our property, kind of a thing. And the alarm it gives you the ability to understand, okay, mom or dad left home, that kind of stuff. And then you can also communicate with two-way voice because it's cellular. And we built this feature we call Quick Connect, so that the person with the smartphone app can say not only, hey, Dad has left the house, but let's call Dad and see why is he on that street corner and what's he up to, kind of a thing. It's just a casual conversation, but it's like a Dick Tracy watch in that case. So, for people like my father-in-law, he was kind of a gizmo geek type guy, pressed lots of buttons, lots of challenges there. But to be able to talk to him and say, hey, what's going on? And he would say, oh, well, I'm just going for a short walk, and great. Everything is okay. And we can, with the geofencing, the location tracking, we can see where he is and decide, okay, do we let him kind of go off on his own because it looks like it's going to be safe for him, or is there something else going on here? And as time goes on with Alzheimer's, unfortunately, it gets more and more, treacherous. But in the early days, which a lot of our customers are, it's a great tool for the family caregivers as well as the facility, if they're also located in a facility, so they can take some of the stress off. But if you need to be able to get them, you don't have to search town to be able to find them. You know exactly where they are.
I got so many questions. So let's start with the sort of the memory care and geofencing first. As you know, many senior living communities have a memory care section that is basically a locked unit.
Right.
There are crash bars that people can go through that set off all kinds of alarms. There are a few people out there who think that memory care units in this locked environment is a really bad idea for older people. And so what I find myself wondering is, do you see this being able to be a better substitute for a locked memory care type community?
Well, there's going to always be a need for the locked facility. With Alzheimer's, as an example, you have 7 stages technically, of Alzheimer's. I don't know all by heart, but, so everybody's got a little bit different journey. And sometimes, phase 1 or stage 1 takes, is longer than others, kind of thing. So I think from just a quality of life perspective, it's a tool. It's an added tool. Now, the cool thing about our tool is, since it's cellular based, is that it's everywhere a cell signal exists. So if they're in the facility, or if they're in the courtyard, for example, in the last, phase of my father-in-law's life, he was in a facility that had a beautiful courtyard type thing, so we can understand kind of his activities. And he had a quick decline, in that facility, but it maximized his quality of life, but also helped us, as even though he was in a facility, a paid facility, is that we were still caregivers and we're still involved, bringing people in to help, let them play checkers together, and it was just one of those things where we tried to make the best of a bad situation. So these are tools. Now, in addition to the geofencing, and some of the other things that we do with our wearable is understanding these activities. So it's not just a step counter, but also understanding, for example, even when somebody falls. And we use AI to be able to detect that. Since we have a big software infrastructure in the cloud, to be able to analyze data in real time. So if my father-in-law fell, which he became, more and more common falling, is that we can understand, for example, that that happened, and we can talk to him with the voice feature, as well as be able to get help to him as soon as possible. So, I mean, there's a lot of little, different pieces of the puzzle here to be able to improve the lives of the caregivers. And when I say caregivers, I don't mean just the family members. I mean also the care professionals that are trying to do a good job taking care of a large number of people in a facility, because you want to know, what's kind of the priority right now. And if in the case of somebody fell down the hallway or something like that you couldn't see visually, is that you want to know that as soon as possible as a care professional.
So as you know, my audience is primarily people who live who work in the senior living space. And so I'm really fascinated by what other kind of data, a couple things. What kind of data that you collect besides just the location? You've talked a little bit about this motion. So for instance, can I then take all this data that's coming out of an individual resident and say, well, it looks like we're seeing a trend where they're stumbling more, or they're tripping more, or they're not moving as much, and maybe we need to do something, and how does that work?
Yeah, so there's other pieces. There's a thing called Theora 360 that we're working on, actually under an NIH grant. And what we're doing with that is it's higher resolution information about body movements. So in that case, the tools can be used for things like understanding changes in sleeping habits, because unfortunately, as we get older, there's more and more medications, and there's side effects of medications. Maybe you get up more often, during the evening, and that's, fall risk, assessment, understanding kind of, is it a high risk or is it low risk, and all just the impacts of the meds, right? And that's one thing that I in my career, when I was working with a lot of these larger hospital chains and whatnot, just understanding things like that were things that were just not done. Today, with things we're doing with the OraCare and sensor technologies, is, with my father-in-law, he had UTIs, urinary tract infections. And those are repetitive as you get older. And with him, when he was at independent living, we had an incident where, he ended up in the hospital, because after a few days, you go from a $20 over-the-counter, no side effect medication to you're in the hospital, treating the infection with some pretty serious stuff. And and we didn't know this beforehand, but after working with neurologists like at University of Texas here outside of Austin, it causes delirium. So these medications that are fighting the infection cause delirium with people. And with my father-in-law, we had to have family members with him in the hospital basically around the clock, because he was pulling the IVs out and all that kind of stuff. And the hospital folks were kind of at their wits' end, and they're like, well, we got to get rid of this guy. Can he go somewhere else, kind of thing? But, it just little things became big challenges, huge challenges. And I think that, people talk about, keeping people out of the ER, older people out of the ER and whatnot. These are the tools that I think will help us do that. It's not perfect. It doesn't solve everything, but it does make a big difference, because you can also communicate with the clinicians much more effectively. I'd take my father-in-law to a doctor's visit, which was, pretty much a half-day thing, even if it was a 30-minute consult. And, the doctor would ask him about, how do you feel? Are you in pain? Or all these normal questions that we get asked when you go to the doctor. And most of the time, his answers were totally dead wrong. As far as, and it wasn't trying to mislead the doctor. I think it was because of the Alzheimer's, that he was just kind of that get up and go, ex-Navy pilot. And, he was gonna shake this thing, and, I'm fine. Help that next person, help my wife or something who's in pain. He was a great guy. He passed away a few years ago, but it was
Yeah, they're really, those are interesting challenges. I'm sort of smiling as you're talking about this, because I was with my stepfather last week at his cardiologist, and it was like, well, how are things going? Well, they're fine. And I finally said, well, no, they're actually not fine. Here's where we're at. Right. So yeah, I get it. So a couple of questions. If I'm in a senior living community, do you have a dashboard, or do I have to, if I have 100 residents who are using your things, do I need 100 cell phones, or how do I do that?
Well, yeah, here's the deal. My background is my last, publicly traded company is a leader in what they call the machine-to-machine IoT business. So we started Clairvoyant. We built a lot of software infrastructure in the back end. So we have this platform we call ESP, and we can give, for example, access to specific devices, to specific, customers. And then we built, applications on iPads and other smartphones and whatnot, so that people can use the devices they already use to be able to manage specific parts of the population. So it might be an individual, it could be a wing of a facility, those kinds of things. So we can pair people up and make it so that you're not, the data that you're getting, you're not just doused with all kinds of information. Because that's the other challenge of this business, is that I got involved with telemedicine really early, and it was about 2000 or so, when we first started having cellular modems that would be able to transmit information out of places like they were University of Minnesota Medical Center kind of things up north. And, the doctors, that I work with are like, well, what are we going to do with all this data?
Yeah.
So I don't want all this data, and there was liability issues, of course, and other things. But now I think the world has completely changed, with cloud computing and ubiquitous cellular connectivity that's low cost, by the way, because in the earlier days it was very expensive. So you couldn't scale it very well. But now it's, you kind of pare it back and say, well, I may not need to know his pulse oximetry, 100 times a day, but knowing that he's, doing this or that, or his sleeping habits have completely turned upside down. I'm not going to diagnose the patient with that information, but I'm going to use that information as a tool to be able to take that snippet of clinical time to do a better job.
Yeah. So I this data thing is a big challenge, right? I was talking to an operator who's doing a lot of work with AI, and one of the things that their chief technology officer was telling me is that they collect something like 120,000 data points for each resident in a year, right? And that's without overwhelming. And so talk to me a little bit about kind of where AI plays into all of this and what it helps you figure out, see.
Well, let's take the fall detection as a first challenge, an easy one. So we started monetizing that about a year ago. And the challenge with fall detection technology before that was the false positives and false negatives were really bad. So you'd have this, it looks like, I got this device, I got this cool app on my iPhone, and it's told me that grandma's fallen 5 times a day or whatever. You call grandma, and it's like, hey, how's it going, grandma? Everything's great. Did you fall today? Now, and she say, no, everything's good. Don't worry about me. I'm great. I'm going to go out and play, poker later today. It was just kind of, stupid stuff, right? So we ended up taking, basically leveraging neural network engine technology and AI to train these systems to be more accurate. And in addition to that, because we have cellular communication and we have this scalable cloud computing, in the sky, there's visible stuff in the sky, is that we can say, okay, we change kind of the model. So it's like, if we think, we call them anomalies occur with the person that's using our product, is that we connect, very quickly. This is within a second to the cellular network, and then back to our cloud, and then we're moving data. We're kind of watching this thing. Not when I say watching, we don't use camera technology because I just consider that too, too risky for a lot of different things, and it's also not the best technology, compared to what we're doing today as far as resolution of the information. But we're watching that information now. Like if somebody's walking down a hallway and I take this watch and I hit a door jam, going down a simple hallway, that would look normally like a fall because of the impact inertia, the inertial impact, right? Technology-wise for other products. What we do is we say, oh, that's an anomaly. Let's start watching, and we see that Steve is continuing to walk down the hallway without missing a step. So that's not a fall, right? So you take all this information. Yeah, so you're leveraging, because it's all this massive amount of data, that's where the AI thing comes in, because it's really about, okay, I got this massive amount of data. How do I make it so that it turns into English?
This is a huge problem, right? I know that in the senior living industry, we've fallen in love with dashboards, and I think dashboards are really important. But if you've got, with the amount of data we have, you could have 50 dashboards to look at every day, and that becomes probably overwhelming. It's sort of using airplane parlance. It's notification fatigue from a warning fatigue that airlines really worry about, right? So figuring that out is really, really important.
Well, it's kind of like, when cameras became inexpensive for places to monitor whether it's patients or whatever, right? Is that, you got this beautiful dashboard, got 50, displays or whatever. It look really impressive, right? But as far as at the end of the day, it didn't take very long for the fatigue to set in. So, things would be going on camera 10 or 20, and it's like, they could be, terrible things going on, but you just completely miss it. With with sensor technology, like what we're doing, in general, what we're doing, we call situational awareness, is understanding when something's different, something's really gone wrong. So whether that's a fall has occurred, for example, or there's somebody that's been in the bathroom for, an unusually high amount of time. Because, and when I say that, it can be customized down to that individual. So if you've got 100 people in a facility, everybody's going to have a little bit different toileting habits, kind of a thing. But understanding where the deviations are, the baseline, and then how the change is, you're looking at kind of that risk analysis for something else going on. And we're actually applying that with the fall detection as our next step with a lot of academia folks that understand, bodies, muscle, bone structure, kinesiologists and stuff, to understand how do we rate people automatically for fall risk analysis. Because in a facility with those 100 people, that's something would be fantastic, right? Because if you got somebody that's the risk change, for example, has occurred dramatic, something's changed dramatically recently, you could say, again, let's talk to Steve and maybe have him do a get up and go test or something like that. Some simple things to be able to say, well, yeah, everything's okay, or let's elevate this, whether it's through the family or through the care facilities services or whatever, to give Steve a better quality of life. And I think that's where we are now with AI.
So we've got just maybe 3 or 4 minutes left, and I really want to get into this idea of somebody looking at this and saying, we think that we need this motion sensing technology and we don't have it, or we've got camera-based technology and it doesn't feel like it's adequate. How do people get engaged with you? Again, particularly in the senior living, so sort of on an institutional level.
Yeah, so I can give out my email address. It's Stephen.Popovich@clairvoyantnetworks.com. We have a sales team that we can get you involved with once we understand kind of what your goals are. We are I would describe ourselves as a solutions type of a business. So we're understanding how to take away some of the business pain, kind of thing, rather than just products. But you'd be surprised, with the technology that's available today from us and some other companies, is that the entry points are not like they used to be a few years ago. With, I'll give you a simple example. Like, so with cellular communication, what we've done now is that all those hassles as far as connecting devices in a property, whether it's assisted living or a hospital or whatever, is all those walls are gone. And we have secure communication that we can drop in. Literally. So if you told me, hey, I've got this skilled nursing, I got 30 beds or whatever, I want to be able to take, your technology so I can do fall detection around the bed, understand sleep habits, contactlessly, and, understand, when people are, if they're restful and things like that, as far as their sleeping habits, those things can be done for, really just, it's literally, less than $100 a month, end to end. And I'm talking about not only the sensing devices, but the infrastructure, and the infrastructure software. So putting a smartphone app on your phone, for that group of patients, for example, or residents, and then be able to leverage that historical data as well, because data, the cost of data storage has completely changed in the last 20 years. So, but yeah, I definitely encourage you to reach out. This is my passion. It's like I said, we've been involved with it. We're still caregivers for my mother-in-law, who's just turned 97, there's a lot of great things that you can do, and it's not only for the lives of the individuals, but it's also the caregivers, whether you're a professional or your family member.
So I think I've got time for one more question. I want you to imagine that you're 5 years down the road with your company and your technology. Tell me about how you're changing the world.
Well, if you go back to like that UTI example, the idea there is to be able to intercept the issue early, and to be able to have the well, because the solutions exist from a clinical side already, but being able to intercept from this data that we're collecting, so that people like my father-in-law could get help long before the infection spread. He didn't have to go to a doc in the box or anything else. He was basically treated at home, because these medications don't have any side effects, and they've been on the market for decades, and they're low cost too. So instead of doing the hospital thing, which costs, in our experience, our personal experience was 20 grand, it was $20 literally. I would go down to Walmart, pick up the prescription from the telemedicine, service we were working with. A doctor, was all involved with this process. And a couple days later, you could see the metrics completely change back to normal. That is such a night and day difference, but there's a lot of stories like that.
I love that, and I think it's a great story to end on, the idea that you can use technology to avoid hospitalization, to bring people back to normal. I know that oftentimes we don't necessarily think of normal as being that great, but particularly when we're talking about older people, normal is it sounds terrible to say, is often as good as it gets, right?
Well, yeah, and everybody's different, right? I was blessed. My father-in-law had a great personality. Everybody loved him, kind of a thing. So I'm sure he was in a little bit of pain, even though he said he wasn't in any pain. But he had a high quality of life. He did things he wanted to do and all, and that is the best we can do, I think, in our case today.
Yeah. Cool. Stephen, thank you very much. Thank you for watching. We will be back on Friday with Foresight TV. And Steve, if you hold on for just a minute after the show is over.
All right. Well, thanks for the opportunity to share.